Welcome to the newest episode of Beyond the Fame with Jason Fraley. I'm your host, Jason Fraley, picking the brains of the top filmmakers, musicians, and artists of our time. An American Tale the Musical makes its world premiere tonight at Children's Theater Company in Minneapolis, Minnesota as Fievel Goes Midwest. I spoke to Tony-winning playwright Itamar Moses about adapting the iconic Don Bluth film, as well as memories of the band's visit winning 10 Tonys on Broadway, including Best Musical. Itamar, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's my pleasure.
Now, we said you're premiering there at the CTC in Minneapolis. Will there be, are there plans to eventually come here to the DC area? I'm trying to find a local angle, but if not, it's okay. It's still a world premiere. Breaking news.
Yeah, especially with a musical, and most especially with a musical based on such a sort of well-known and beloved film. Yes, there are certainly ambitions for it to move beyond Minneapolis, to go to other cities, and including, a major theater city and a major city for America's tradition of politics and immigration. DC would be the perfect place to do this show. So nothing is set in stone or quite certain, but that's certainly our intention is to take it everywhere.
So you would like to bring it to DC. It would, the theater community and, like you're saying, the politics, immigration, all the themes of it would be perfect for our town. So
absolutely, DC is a great theater town. It really is.
Oh, it really, really is. A lot of people forget, like West Side Story started at National Theater before Broadway, and I think Les Mis played Kennedy Center before Broadway. Like, it goes on and on. Dear Evan Hansen and, A Strange Loop, and there's a lot of stuff that's played here before it heads up to New York.
Arena. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. But anyway, so you'll have to stay tuned, listeners, for some DC or Baltimore shows maybe. But in the meantime, let's treat this as sort of, like a sneak peek at this cool world premiere. I mean, it's national theater news as far as I'm concerned. So how'd you get the idea to do it? Were you a fan of, Fievel ever since you were a kid, or how'd you come think to do that? Let's do this right now.
I wish I could say I was the genius who came up with the idea to do this adaptation. It was actually the people at Children's Theater Company in Minneapolis, which is why it's starting there. They had a discussion with Universal, who own the film, and got the stage rights to adapt it. So it was them, people at CTC, who contacted me and said, hey, do you want to be involved in this? But the answer to the second part of your question is yes. I mean, I was 9 years old when the movie came out. So I don't know if that's if that's not the exact target age for that movie, it's close. So I remember the movie from when I was a kid. I probably hadn't seen it in 30 years, but some of those songs were still in my head. And of course, Fievel's iconic hat. So I was like, yeah, sign me up. And that was how I got involved. It's like they just sort of reached out to me and asked if I wanted to do the adaptation. And I jumped at the chance.
So you said you were 9?
When the movie came out, yeah, I was 9 years old.
And where was this? Where'd you grow up? Just real quick.
Berkeley, California, in the San Francisco Bay Area. Yeah.
Okay, so you were 9. You had already gone west before Fievel went west
it's
in the
true.
sequel.
It's true. Yeah, I started west.
Very, very cool. Awesome. Well, in case, you and I remember it well, my wife started singing it the second that I said I was interviewing you. But in case maybe some of our listeners or maybe younger listeners missed it, remind them the basic storyline. I'm not going to make you don't feel like you got to be official log line dropping,
I've gotten good at the capsule summary. So yeah, An American Tale is the story of the Mouskowitzes, a family of Russian Jewish mice who have to flee their village in Russia because it's attacked by cats, who are the Cossacks. And they have to get on a boat and go to America. But on the trip over, Fievel, the son, falls overboard and they think he's drowned. And so they think he's lost. And in fact, he swims to shore and finds himself in 1880s Mouse, New York. And he has to spend the rest of the story sort of navigating that city to find his family again. And on the way meets all of these other colorful mouse characters from other, immigrant communities, and joins their big fight against their nemesis, the cats.
Who are some of these other characters? I know them from the movie, but remind me some of the famous ones.
Yeah, there's his sort of his sidekick, the Artful Dodger to his Oliver, I guess, is Tony to Pony, this sort of streetwise Italian mouse. There's like a protest revolutionary organizing mouse named Bridget. There's Honest John, who runs the mouse equivalent of Tammany Hall, the sort of big political power in the city. There's Warren T. Rat, who's sort of a shady mafioso type character who does some of the underworld dealings Yeah, characters like the Henri, a French pigeon who's building a statue, a famous statue that will one day stand on a little island off the coast of Manhattan. Yeah, those are some of the characters that Fievel and the audience will encounter.
I love that you mentioned Oliver and the Artful Dodger because
Yeah,
that sparked something else for me because uh Disney was doing Oliver and Company sort of like in the 80s was like a rough time for Disney animation before they did decided to do the idea of musicals with Little Mermaid, and then they were off the races, the Renaissance. But back in the
yeah,
80s, Don Bluth was sort of was sticking it to him. He was just
yeah.
as good as the rival of Disney with Land Before Time and All Dogs Go to Heaven, I guess later
Yeah,
Anastasia. But talk about how
yeah.
if we detour from the stage show for a second, but just talk about how Fievel and American Tail kind of kicked off a lot of Don Bluth's, like almost like a golden age of a rival of Disney that I don't think we've ever really even seen since.
No, it's. I'm glad you asked that because it's a part of the story that I do interviews about the show and we talk about what the stage version is like and so on. But this is an important part of the story that most of the interviews don't touch on. But yeah, Don Bluth was an animator at Disney, and he wanted to do different kinds of stories, maybe that were a little darker, a little edgier, a little not even. I mean, they're cartoons for kids. They're not like edgy and like they're not Tarantino, but they're like just to go to a little more sort of artsy, darker place that isn't quite the Disney brand. So he sort of broke away and started doing his own thing. And yeah, American Tail was one of his efforts. You mentioned Land Before Time. The Secret of Nim was another one from that period. He made a Laserdisc video game that was really popular called Dragon's Lair that sort of it feels as though you're playing a cartoon. So yeah, he really did create this sort of little fiefdom of his own. And it's funny, we were just talking about this in rehearsal the other day. There's a little throwaway joke in the movie. The movie's about mice, of course, right?
Right.
And there's a scene when they get to the Tammany Hall sequence where they meet Honest John. And when we arrive at that scene in the movie, and we've preserved this for the stage show, they're in the middle of an Irish wake. And the mouse who's dead on the table that they're sort of commemorating is a mouse named Mickey. And we were just talking in rehearsal the other day about how that must have been Don Bluth, like, needling his old bosses, being like, yeah, Mickey Mouse is dead. Now, of course, Mickey Mouse was far from dead and Disney is doing just fine. But yeah, no, it's a funny little part of the story that this movie, among others, came out of Don Bluth's, striking out on his own, wanting to have his own artistic path.
That is awesome. And thank you for being able to talk about the animated film history in addition to the Broadway stuff, because
Yeah.
I think Land Before, just another side anecdote. Land Before Time was the very first movie I ever saw in the theater, and then I guess Little
Wow.
Mermaid was the second after. So I was actually a Bluth guy before Disney. Didn't even realize it as a kid, but you know what I mean.
Sure. Yeah.
But
So funny.
but very cool. Great tidbit with Mickey on the table there.
Yeah.
All right, bringing it back to the show. So like you've described so much, visual splendor that I can just imagine from the movie, and now trying to see that on stage. You mentioned his famous hat, and then the backdrops of New York City and like a shipwreck, and like there's all this stuff. Like, how do we visually bring that to life? Is it projections? Is it backdrops? Like, yeah, paint a visual
Right.
picture for me.
Yeah, that's another really good question because obviously in a cartoon, you can put anything on the screen that you can imagine. You just draw it, right? And you have very, very different limitations when you're doing something on stage. So it's also a great challenge and opportunity for the designers because the magic of theater is sort of illusion. It's like the magic of like a magician doing card tricks or something. So no, we're not really using projections, which in a show like this almost feel a little bit like cheating, but it's more like the feeling of like a circus show that all comes out of a trunk or something. And you can play around a lot with scale where, a brilliant set designer and set department and props designers and so on, you just build these objects that are, human objects at enormous size. So if everything is consistent that way and your whole environment is built out of when Bridget stands on a soapbox, she's standing literally on a giant box for one bar of soap. You get a sense of scale, and then costuming is another big part of it, where it's a challenge similar to something with The Lion King, where you're dealing with characters who are anthropomorphized animals. So you need to get across what animals they are. In this case, mostly mice, but there's cats, there's cockroaches, there's the pigeon. So how do you do that while not concealing the actor's face, which they need to express emotion to the audience? Also, the cats, of course, have to be much bigger than the mice. So how do you do that? And we've sort of involved puppetry. So it's basically like taking all of the basic tools of theater, many of which are ancient, right? It's one of our oldest art forms, and figuring out how those can do the equivalent that you can do with just a beautiful drawing in a cartoon.
Wow, that sounds really cool. And bonus
Yeah.
points for just so easily saying anthropomorphized. I don't even know if I said it right.
you,
I
you nailed it. That was good.
I reward you 10,000 bonus points for that.
Thank you.
All right, cool. All right, well that's the visuals, but of course, as we have been hinting at, it is a musical. So let's round it out with that. We remember somewhere out there, and then there
Yes.
are no cats in America. There's so many we remember from the movie, but do those make it in the show? Is it a mix of new stuff, or how does that work?
So it's really funny because the movie, and again, I hadn't seen it probably in 30 years when I took this job. So watching it again, one of the first things that struck me was that the movie only has 4 songs.
Right.
And you mentioned the two that people tend to remember somewhere out there in No Cats in America. There's another one called Never Say Never, and there's a fourth one that people remember even less. So even if we used all 4, that's not really enough for a full stage musical. So we knew right off the bat we were going to have to write 6, 7, 8 more songs to fill out the score. In the end, I think we used 3 of the 4 songs from the movie and wrote a bunch of new ones, just to give it the sort of frequency of song that you need for like a legit stage musical. But that's been really fun too, to get to sort of write songs for these iconic characters, to go a little bit deeper into the emotion or into the comedy of what certain moments could give rise to.
Now, what was the name of the fourth song that you said that no one even remembers? Is it
There's a
a
song. It's the
duo?
one that yes, I sort of let it fall by the wayside because it's the one we didn't use. We've kept, like I said, the two you
Okay.
mentioned, and we've also kept Never Say Never, which is a song that Henri the Pigeon sings.
Right.
Uh, there's a song late in the movie called We're a Duo,
Yeah.
that it honest I mean, I have no way of confirming this. I'd have to ask the people who made the movie, but it feels like one of those songs that was just sitting in somebody's drawer, like a trunk song, you might call it,
Drunk song.
that was written for something else. And then they were like, oh, we can use that We're a Duo song here, and sort of plugged it in. It doesn't really have the same
Yeah.
sort of, certainly not, power of something like Somewhere Out There, a
Yeah.
Grammy winning song that people still know today, or the sort of specificity of There Are No Cats in America, that I could still hum the chorus 30 years later before I watched the movie again. So that's the one. That's the one
Gotcha.
that ended up on the chopping block. But I will say that the number we've replaced it with, because we put another song in that spot, is my favorite new song that we wrote for the show, and it's a big production number for Chorus of Cockroaches, and it's hands down my favorite new song in the show. So
And what's that one called? You can't say it's your favorite new one without actually
it's called
teasing the
it's
title
called
a little bit.
yeah, it's called Set You Free. And
Set you free.
yeah, and it's just a giant song and dance number for an ensemble of cockroaches.
I love it. I love it. So it was a fine replacement for the
I think
trunk
so.
song. That's stowaway trunk song on the immigrant ship, right?
Exactly.
A duo can sink to the bottom as far as we're
Yeah.
concerned. One place.
Yeah.
Any other new ones you want to go to or go into, or you think that's good?
Yeah, no, I mean, I like all the new songs. I was lucky to work with this great composing team, Alan Schmuckler and Michael Mahler, and then the 3 of us did lyrics together, and they did the music, and they're just very smart and funny, and willing to sort of try things and throw stuff out. This is exactly what you want in collaborators, and so they were able to like write in styles that feel like they evoke the different groups that are in New York at the time. So yeah, we've got an opening number where the Mouskowitzes are having a Hanukkah party in their village in Russia, and so you've got this sort of Hanukkah song feel to it. And then when we're at the Tammany Hall equivalent for the mice, there's kind of an Irish jig type song, where they imagine a world where they don't have to deal with cats at all. So there's this great kind of variety of musical styles, this sort of tapestry that mirrors the different facets of New York at the time. Yeah, so it's cool. It's a good score. I like it.
Yeah, absolutely. And is any of the, in terms of the score, is any of the music, does it echo, what was it, James Horner in the original one, I think? The
It's
late
funny.
James Horner?
Yeah. There's incidental music in the music, yeah, by James Horner. Yes, I'd actually say yes because
Okay.
obviously it's original stuff that Alan and Mike wrote, but tonally, since we mirror a lot of the scenes, it's not we stick close to the structure of the movie with some departures and expansions and so on. So we end up in a lot of the same kinds of scenes with a lot of the same vibe. And so, when we first meet Warren T. Rat, who's sort of the villain, in the movie, the underscoring in that scene is kind of a jazzy walking bass, but there isn't really a big, villain, meet the villain number for Warren in the movie. So we wrote one and it has the same kind of vibe as like the incidental music from the scene where we meet him. So that kind of thing. Yeah. So I guess the answer is sort of yes.
Sort of in spirit tonally. Cool.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. Well, I have plenty to work with about, about An American Tail, the musical. Well, before you go, like I always, whenever I have someone on, I love to sort of hear like your journey. So you've already sort of already hinted at it that you grew up in Berkeley and saw
Yeah.
Five O at age 9. But what else, what else is sort of your origin story of, how you got into, either musical theater or, like what kind of
Yeah.
stuff did you dig when you were growing up watching?
It's a good question. When I was a kid, I was a big nerd for like fantasy and sci-fi novels.
Good.
I was one of those kids who would go to like the fantasy sci-fi bookstores around the Bay Area and like read all that stuff.
Nice.
The Dark is Rising and Piers Anthony and the Wheel of Time and all that, which is now a TV series on Amazon, but it was an obscure thing only nerds knew about in the late 80s and early 90s. But so I thought I wanted to write fantasy novels because it's what I was reading, but I was interested in writing generally from a pretty young age. And then I got into theater later, maybe when I was a senior in high school and then more in college. Started doing theater and trying to write plays. And be involved in theater in various ways. And so by the time I moved to New York, I was pretty locked in on like, I'm going to try to be like a New York playwright. And I went to grad school at NYU for it and started having some of my early productions. So that was the path, was just becoming a working playwright. And then musicals happened semi-accidentally. I have a friend named Gabi Alter who I grew up with in Berkeley and who writes music. And he also went to NYU for grad school. He did the musical theater writing program. And we graduated around the same time and we were buddies. So we were hanging out anyway in New York. And we were like, well, we have complementary skills. Let's write a musical together. So we did. And that became my first musical. It was a satire about reality television called Nobody Loves You. And so we did that show in San Diego and then we did it off Broadway. And that kind of began this parallel part of my career to my playwriting, which was doing book writing for musicals. And, so I did another one. I did an adaptation of The Fortress of Solitude, which is a big Jonathan Lethem novel with director Daniel Aukin and a composer named Michael Friedman. And then The Band's Visit, which you mentioned at the top, which is the one that's certainly best known from the ones I've done, happened after that. So by that point, when I was like having a third musical and then like starting to win awards for it, I could no longer deny that it was like a co-equal facet of my artistic life, even though it was just in my head, it was just this like other sort of sideline thing I was doing because it was fun, because I liked musicals, because it's a little bit more collaborative and less lonely than playwriting. So that was kind of how all that happened. And presumably it was that work that led to Children's Theater Company reaching out to me about American Tail. But and then I also, as a lot of playwrights do these days, because it's, A, to pay the bills, and B, because you can do really good work there these days. I also work in television some. So I think it's a pretty common story for playwrights where that's the first thing you're doing, but then there are all these other forms that require people who can write, scenes, who can do dramatic storytelling. So you end up writing TV, you end up writing musicals, you end up writing screenplays. So it's kind of a gradual expansion from that first impulse, which was like, I'm going to write some plays.
Well, your versatility of mediums is impressive. I mean, not many people can write a Tony-winning Broadway musical, but then turn around and write, TV, Boardwalk Empire, or Men of a Certain Age. I mean, you know what I mean? Like that
You'd be
takes some
surprised, but
some
thank you.
nimble
I'll take
skill.
it. Thank you. I'll take it.
Real quick, you mentioned Band's Visit, but I'd love to do at least one more deep dive question into
Sure.
that because at this, I mean, like you're saying, that's sort of really, really put you on the map and cemented. Like, okay, I guess I'm doing musicals now.
Yeah.
How did you come? I mean, because it was a movie first, like an
Yeah.
Israeli film, 2007 Israeli film. But how did you and
Yeah.
David? Yeah, is it Yazbek? Is that how you say it?
Yazbek. Yeah, that's right.
Did you see the movie first, or did David see it, or did someone bring it to both of you guys? Like, how did you decide? Like, we're gonna do this story about this band of musicians bringing this community.
Yeah. It was option three that you said.
Door number three.
Yeah, there is, he still exists. There is a commercial theater producer named Orrin Wolf, um, who saw the movie when it ran at some festival in New York City, probably in 2007 or 2008, after it premiered in Israel, and he watched it and immediately sensed that it would make a good stage musical. And so that began sort of a journey for him, for Oren, of tracking down the filmmaker, convincing him to give him the rights. It's funny because Aron Kohler, the Israeli filmmaker, I've talked to him about this since, and what he always says is he said no, like the first few times. He didn't grant the rights, and because he didn't really know anything about musicals, so he said something like, I thought it was a bad idea because the only musical I know is Cats, and I thought, so what? He's going to dress them as cats? It don't make sense. But
There are no cats in the Band's Visit.
Band's Visit, true. So eventually, Oren convinced him, and he turned over the rights, and so it was Oren who hired me and David Yazbek to adapt it. And so I knew of the movie, I'd heard of it, but I'd never seen it. So after I came in for my first meeting, they sort of handed me a DVD and said, well, give this a watch and see what you think. And if you think you could adapt it and if you think you'd be a good fit. So that was how I got brought on board. I was sort of a hired hand, which is how sometimes things are generated, by you and out of, a crazy idea you have on your own. But even when you're a hired hand, the only way to do it is to find your own way in, to kind of figure out where inside yourself it allows you to, this property, this thing you're adapting, whatever it is, allows you to say something you actually do really want to say and that is personal to you. Otherwise, it ends up just being like, kind of this mercenary thing you're doing for hire. You have to figure out how to make it personal. But with stuff like Band's Visit and American Tail, which have such sort of deep themes that resonate with me in all kinds of ways, like my personal identity, my family history, and then also just these humanistic messages that like I respond to. It's not so hard to find my way in.
Absolutely. Final seconds, Tony night. I mean, I'd be remiss if I don't at least get a memory because, gosh, Band's Visit won, I think 10, including the top prize, best musical. You yourself, got to go up for best book of a musical. But memories of that hearing not only your name called, but like over and over and over. I gotta say 10 overs. What was that? That must have been surreal.
It was completely surreal. Initially, I did not expect, and we did not expect it to go so overwhelmingly well. We knew we were going to do okay. There were a few people from our show who were nominated who it kind of felt like a lock. It was, I think, the fourth time Yazbek had been nominated, and it sort of felt like he was due. So we're like, okay, Yazbek's going to win. And our leading lady, Katrina Lenk, had a lot of momentum, and it felt like she was going to win. And we thought that was a good chance we could win Best Musical. But, so that's 3, maybe we're like, okay, so maybe we'll get 4 or 5. We did not expect 10. And with me in particular, because I was up against Tina Fey for Mean Girls, who I revere. I mean, she's a genius. I'm a huge fan of hers. The smart money was on her for the Best Book Award. And, some of the other whatever awards felt, less clear. And, but my award was really early in the evening. So what happened was, I think we'd won 1. And then I was the second person from our show whose nomination came up. And when I won, it was totally surreal for me. Like it was an out-of-body experience. I had practiced this speech, but I didn't think I was going to have to use it. And I remember getting up on the stage at Radio City Music Hall and looking out at this audience of thousands of people, many of them quite famous, and my mind just being a complete blank for a terrifying second. And then the speech came back and I launched into it. But there was this moment where I was like, I literally had forgotten what I had planned to say. And then I went backstage because they immediately usher you backstage to do a series of interviews. And I was sort of like, oh, if I won, that probably means we're going to do very well because I seem like one of the least likely people from our show
Right,
to win. And
right.
sure enough, as you're going down the hallways and doing these interviews, they have TV monitors up. So you can still see the ceremony. And I remember going into this back hall, and then I saw, Ariel Stachel, who won Best Supporting Actor, basically, Best Featured Actor, it's called, uh, shortly after me. So I saw Ariel up there giving a speech. And then I rounded another corner and got to some more interviews, and I saw another monitor, and I saw Tyler Michelot, our lighting designer, up there giving a speech. So there was this real time snowball feeling of like, oh, this is one of those nights. So then I remember thinking, just this is incredible, and like remember all of this because this. I mean, you could have other successes. You're going to have the ups and downs of a career. I could have other things that do well, but I remember thinking a night like this is probably never going to happen again in my life. So it was great. It was like a really, really overwhelming and kind of crazy experience. Yeah.
Oh yeah, and like you said, knocking off some titans to do it. But in the if now that I think about it though, voters they probably wanted to reward. Well, never mind. I was gonna say they wanted to reward the original work over
But it's not. Yeah, they were all
Frozen, Mean Girls, and SpongeBob. But Band's Visit was a movie.
It was not. They were all adaptations. Ours was
Yeah.
adapted from the most obscure source material, but they were all adaptations. Yeah.
There you go. It's the adaptation best musical year. But no, man, you're in good company. I mean, seriously, like when we look back at it, Fun Home, Hamilton, Dear Evan Hansen, The Band's Visit, and Hadestown, like that's a 5-year run, baby. That's incredible.
It's a good run. Yeah, it's good company.
Awesome. Well, you've been good company, so I appreciate you joining us. Anything else you want to say before we run about American Tail?
I don't think so. We, if any of your listeners happen to be in Minneapolis in the next couple of months, we run from April 29th until June 18th, I think, and we might extend, but at least until mid-June. So yeah, come check us out if you're in the area.
Yes, all the best. We wish you success, so much success that it allows you to tour the country and come our way. So we appreciate it.
I certainly hope so.
All right, Itamar Moses, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening to Beyond the Fame with Jason Fraley. Our theme music is Scott Buckley's Clarion. Remember to give us a 5-star rating if you like what you hear. We'll see you next time. I wanted to take a second to tell you about an app I really enjoy. Living in the DC area is great, and Podcast DC gathers all of the local shows that I like all in one local app. Health, sports, local news, politics, and so much more. Podcast DC is the new local app with hundreds of DC area podcasts to choose from. I can earn exciting rewards just for listening and share the podcasts I love instantly. Available in the App Store or in Google Play, listen local with Podcast DC.